Okay, maybe we should get started. My name is Jon Sweeney. I am the religion editor here at Monkfish Publishing, and delighted to see all of your shiny faces and welcome you here to this conversation that we are having between Elizabeth Cunningham about her new book, My Life as a Prayer, a Multifaith Memoir, and publisher Paul Cohen. I'm going to introduce the two of them very briefly, and then I'm going to exit and leave the conversation to them. I will then jump back in after a half an hour or so has passed, and what my job will be is to look at the chat. You should type your questions as they occur to you in the chat. I will see them and I will read them. I'm sure that makes sense. We've all gotten used to this process on Zoom. So let me introduce them to you. Paul Cohen is the CEO and publisher of Monkfish, which is an independent press publishing spiritual and literary books from a diverse range of perspectives. Paul founded Monkfish 21 years ago in 2002, and the readers he had in mind were devoted spiritual seekers whose passion for the spiritual quest would lead them to read across the spiritual traditions. He lives in Rhinebeck, New York. Novelist and poet Elizabeth Cunningham is also now a memoirist, and she's best known for the Maeve Chronicles, a series of award-winning novels featuring a Celtic Mary Magdalene. The descendant of generations of Episcopal priests, Elizabeth grew up in a small upstate New York town next door to her church and an overgrown enchanted wood, and has spent her life writing stories that move easily through the worlds of scriptures and fairy tales. Resisting the temptation to follow in her forefathers' footsteps to become a priest, she was ordained as an interfaith minister and counselor in midlife. Her new book is also her first foray after a lifetime of writing into nonfiction, and it's that memoir that we keep mentioning, My Life as a Prayer. Paul and Elizabeth have known each other for about 20 years. So I'm going to get them started in conversation, which it shouldn't be difficult for them to sustain it because they've been friends for a long time. But I wanted to give them the first question. And I was thinking that longtime book publisher, longtime writer, that you are both people of passion. You write out of passion, you publish out of passion. Certainly no one becomes a writer or becomes a book publisher, especially these days, because they want to make a lot of money, because it just doesn't happen. So it's passion that fuels you. And I want you to talk about that passion. Does passion drive what you write, and how does it? Does it drive what you publish, and how does it? Do you temper your passion in some way, or do you just follow it headlong? I thought it'd be interesting to hear the two of you talk about passion as a writer and as a book publisher. And now I'm going to leave it to you.
We don't flip a coin. Straw, who goes first?
No, I don't have a coin. Would you like to go first, or would you prefer me to go first?
I can go. I'm sure Jon on purpose talked about passion, because that was the first book that we did together, The Passion of Mary Magdalene.
That's right.
And that was a real toss of the coin. But she's still with us. So that was almost 20 years ago, 2005. I sent you an enormous, passion-driven manuscript that you said scared you because it was too big. But you did it anyway. You took a leap of faith. So thank you for that.
Sure.
There was a lot of other questions attached to that question, but I'm sure we'll get to them. I think it's your turn to say something now.
Okay. Well, my publishing decisions are definitely driven by passion. If I feel passionate about a project, I'm going to want to publish the book probably regardless of whether I think it's going to make money or not. Of course, if I think that a book is going to make money, that's another kind of passion. But
yes, let's be honest.
Yeah, but it is really all about passion, because as Elizabeth can attest to, writing a book is a huge momentous process. And so if you don't have passion, it's going to be hard to see it through, I think. And publishing in and of itself is also a pretty extensive an extensive process, and you need that passion to see the project through. So Elizabeth, I wonder if I can ask you to start with just to talk a little bit about the title of the book that you gave your memoir, My Life is a Prayer, because, the word prayer has two meanings. And
Yeah. Well, that was the one thing that I really knew about the book, I think, from the beginning, that it was going to be called that, because it opens with, I don't know what prayer is. I don't know how it works. And it goes on from there. The one thing that I do know is that one who prays is a prayer. So if you pray, regardless of what you believe in, regardless of whether or not you know what you're doing, and there are some pretty profane prayers that you can pray in a sincere way, you are a prayer, one who prays. So that's where that title came from. And it just seems pretty apt. Because you don't need to know anything else. You don't need to know anything else.
in order to pray.
Mm-hmm. You don't need to have a belief system. You don't need to have a religion. You don't need to be baptized, confirmed, ordained, bar mitzvah, nothing.
So who or what do you pray to if you don't believe in anything?
I didn't say I didn't believe in anything, did I? No,
No,
I'm
you
just
didn't.
saying that it's not a requirement. Well, there's a lot of ways that I address prayer. And one of the ways that I often start out in the morning when I go outside in my backyard, which is my church now, my backyard, I pray to the Spirit that lives in and through all things. And I say, this is Elizabeth. I am praying to the Spirit. I am praying to, with, and for the Spirit that lives in and through all things. The phrase, the Spirit that lives in and through all things, came from my Tai Chi teacher, Hawk's brother. And I thought that kind of covers it. And then I added to, with, and for, because I think prayer is located in different places, because sometimes you're praying to, sometimes you're praying with the Spirit or with whatever needs prayer, and sometimes you're even praying for. I mean, there have been times when I actually, especially recently, have found myself praying for Jesus, because this must be a very painful, there must be a lot of very painful times for a deity. So sometimes I think, well, maybe the deity also needs prayer. So I think prayer can be located in a lot of different ways. And of course, I don't know if she would even want to be called a deity, but let's just say I talked to Maeve. I don't know how many people have read the Maeve Chronicles, but she came into being because I wanted a goddess who was incarnate, who could get blisters on her feet, who could get upset, who could make mistakes, just like Jesus. So yeah, Maeve and I talk. I have my own ways of approaching Jesus, and I recognize him by a certain kind of humor that he has, and by his often turning a question on its head. And it's not just with me, but when I've worked with clients, I feel like, and they do the same thing. It's like some of them, oh yeah, that's him, because he's just turned that question just a little bit so that you're seeing everything differently. When I say that I pray to these people, I say that in a very agnostic way, because I think agnostic means I don't know, and I don't know. And since I'm a novelist, I make things up. But that doesn't mean they're not real. That doesn't mean there's not poetic truth. So my approach to prayer in a lot of things is, does it work? Are you connected? Do you feel in communion with something? Because I think the way we frame it and what we call it are just ways into the unknown for each person. So I have a variety of ways to answer your question, but I don't know. I wouldn't say, oh yes, that's absolutely literal truth about any of them.
Wow, that brings up so many questions. But
okay, go for it.
Well, let me just start with, how and why did you decide to write a memoir after all these years of basically focusing on fiction and poetry?
Well, because I had to take a break between drafts of a novel, really.
Mm-hmm.
that's the first reason I said, okay, I always take a little break. I don't always write a memoir, and that was the only one I've ever written. I can still kind of remember walking around hearing this little like mosquito-like voice saying, write about prayer, write a book about prayer, write a book about being a prayer. It didn't say write a memoir exactly. So I think that's the closest. So I was saying the other night when you probably heard me speak at Oblong, I think the word memoir comes closest to the genre that it is, but I'm not I don't color in the lines when it comes to genre, because you could say that, for example, the Maeve Chronicles is historical fiction, but it's also historical fantasy. My books, I like to mess around with genre. It depends on what needs to be said. So it's a memoir in the sense that it does chronologically recount part of my life. But I never could have written a memoir if I hadn't decided what the lens was. And in this case, the lens is prayer. So I'm not going to be writing about my love affairs. I'm not going to be writing about being a mother. There's a lot of things I'm not going to be writing about. In fact, I really try not to write about other living people because that feels very intrusive to me. So the people that are alive that I wrote about, I did it with their permission. And so my inquiry really was, what is prayer? What do I know about it? What do I not know about it? How has it affected my life? And then my life experiences also define for me what is prayer. So it's both ways. It's a lens both ways. You look both ways. So once I started, I said, okay, I guess I'm doing this. Sometimes I regretted it. And sometimes I had some very outspoken prayers about it. The kind of prayers where you scream and you say, yeah, it was your idea. So you better help me out here.
So the process must have been very different, right? Because when you're writing fiction, you can create things the way you want to create things. But when you're writing memoir, you're supposed to sort of hew to what actually happened, right?
Yeah, well, I think when I'm writing fiction, it's not like I get to decide a lot of things. I think all books, and whether they're fiction or nonfiction, there's relationship with the material. But yeah, writing a memoir is harder because with fiction, you definitely have a story that you're telling, and you don't always know where the story is going to go or what it's going to do, but you're telling a story. So with nonfiction, you have to decide, well, what am I telling and what am I not telling? That's why having the subject prayer helped me decide that. But and in the second half of the book, which has been somewhat controversial, the first half is it's autobiographical and consecutive. The second half is more pondering and reflection. And as I said the other night, I could still be writing it. So that was hard because that's not a form that comes naturally to me. Telling stories about my childhood and about various encounters that I've had and about people that I've known who influenced me, that wasn't so hard. But the second half was, and I will say that when I write a novel, I know when it's a rough draft and I know when it's really done. I didn't really know that with this book, and I have to say thank you, Paul, because you really, really helped me realize where I had lost the thread, because I was not experienced with nonfiction, and it was very helpful to you very helpful to me to have you say, oh, we got lost here. Oh, well, I need more of this, or, oh, this is not at all clear. Where with fiction, I didn't need that so much. I'm a little bit here and there, but this was much harder, and you were very helpful. Thank you.
Sure. Yeah, my pleasure.
Yeah.
So, it seems to me that the book "My Life is a Prayer" really it traces sort of a parallel journeys. On the one hand, it talks about how you became a writer, and on the other hand, it talks a lot about how your spiritual journey has been through your life, which is fascinating. And interestingly enough, you use the term, drawing outside the lines or coloring outside. That phrase seems to apply in both of these areas of your life, right? I mean, you have a very broad view, it seems to me, of what constitutes religion and what constitutes spirituality. But I'd like to hear from you how you think these two threads relate to one another in your life and in your prayer life and also in your writing life?
Well, I think that actually, I would say that probably all my books could, under the definition that I've given, be prayers. I think I was very lucky to have been given very rich primary material because I grew up in the church, literally in the church, hearing stories, hearing very rich language that was rhythmic and ornate and beautiful, and also having various traumas with religion within my family. I mean, and as you noted, I think in the introduction, I live next door to a magical wood where I trespassed. So I really hit the mother lode in terms of primary material. So in a sense, I think that all my books work with that. Every single one of them work with that material, which you could say is spiritual. So I'm working things out in all the books. I mean, The Wild Mother, which is my first novel, was a retelling of Adam, Eve, and Lilith. So that's kind of theological. Then the first novel that I published was The Return of the Goddess, where I was trying to look at that pagan roots of the church. And they're all pretty theological. They're all wrestling with the angels or the demons or both. And then there's Maeve. Well, excuse me, I had to rewrite, I had to rewrite the Gospels and the New Testament. I guess I didn't get to Revelations yet. Maybe that's coming. But I mean, I really had, those stories were so deep in me and so wonderful and so troubling at the same time that I had to find a way to work with them and to tell them and to understand them. And so I guess I'm both very reverential and heretical at once. And I think the fiction and the spiritual life are all completely bound up together, even when I don't write about them explicitly.
Right. That's interesting. One of the things I noticed getting to know you, particularly through the process of working on The Passion of Mary Magdalene, is that you have a really interesting relationship with your characters. Your characters come alive to you in a way, and I mean, and even just working on the book, not as the writer but as the publisher, they came alive for me as well. They seem like very real people. And in fact, I think you still use Maeve as one of your social media handles. You're actually posting as one of your characters.
I don't know how she did this because she's a couple of thousand years old, but she's a little more social media savvy than I am, I think. Yeah. She went to the end of her book and disappeared. I shouldn't do plot spoilers, but somehow she emerged on Facebook. I don't know how she did it, but she has a lot of friends. And I think one of the things that's exciting about characters that become real is that they're not just real to you, they're real to the readers. And people will say, well, I was talking to Maeve, and I'm saying, don't forget that she could get you in trouble. Just to remember that. But I think that one of the happiest things of my life is going to be, I mean, I've written a lot of standalone books, and I'll go on writing until I can't breathe, I think. But to write a character that lives outside her pages is like a thrill. I'm still thrilled. When I think about it, I still get goosebumps. And I didn't channel her. People ask about channeling. I don't want to say anything bad about it, but for me, it's a much more active process. It's relationship. And there's give and take. It's a partnership. And I think with all my characters, that's what it's like, but probably especially with Maeve. I mean, I was with her I still am with her, but her story took 20 years to write.
Yeah. And now it's been quite a few years since it was written as well. So it's decades she's been with you.
Yeah.
So does that must change you to be that deeply involved with the story and with characters?
I think that's what stories do. You start a story and you're working on there's something like it's, the root of the word question is quest. There's a quest. And just like anyone who goes on a quest, whether they're reading or writing or going on a quest in the world, You are going to be challenged. You're going to be transformed, hopefully maybe healed. I mean, people would say, well, you know, Maeve must be based on you. And I said, no, I'm based on her. Only she's a little freer than I am. But yeah, it does. I mean, I hope that every book I write changes me because I learned something through it. I see differently, and I hope, and when I read, that is also true. That's the kind of book I want to read.
Yeah, that's the kind of book I think most of us want to read.
Yeah.
We want to really be changed. We want to be touched.
Yeah. Yes, and I think that especially in a world where fact and false news, all of that, I mean, and when there's a lot of polarization, I think what a story can do, whether it's a novel or a myth or any kind of a story, wherever it comes from, it allows you to see from more than one point of view. And that's real. I think that's always been important, and it's really important now.
You know, I see that as sort of a through line in both your spiritual life and in your writing life. You know, you're able to embrace in a deep way characters that have very different points of view, but, you know, with empathy, with a lot of empathy. And on your spiritual life, you don't seem to ever sort of reject anything. Like in My Life is Prayer, there's a lot of liturgical prayers in there that you must have. So you, even though you, and I couldn't even say you outgrew your Episcopalian. You didn't. You embraced it and you transcended it, right? I mean, that's the impression I have, and that's the impression I get from the book.
Yeah, I think that's true. And I think you noticed that right away. You said you're coming back closer to your roots, and maybe we all do as we get older. But I also wrote a lot about being a Quaker, and I eventually realized, as I was saying the other night, that being a Quaker opened up all kinds of things because of the silence. But that I love and respect things about both those traditions.
Right.
Couldn't stay inside tradition because I don't think that's really who I am or what I was meant to do. But that doesn't mean I rejected anything and that I don't love those traditions. I do have a hard time going to church, you know, like at Easter or Holy Week, because it's like, no. I mean, I'm not a literalist, but I live the story so intensely. It's like, no. You left Maeve out. That's not how it happened. So it's hard for me to hear the liturgical story now, although the liturgical story was so deep in me that I had to tell it.
Yeah. And you retold it, like you said. I mean, you wrote a feminist reworking of the Gospels.
Mm-hmm.
That's a piece of work.
Yeah, it was a piece of work.
Yeah.
And I had to write about all the women. Oh my goodness, Ma. Well, people who know her know what I mean. She took me entirely by surprise, the Blessed Virgin Mary. And then, and because it's a novel, I mean, the Gospel according to Mary from the Gnostic Gospels, it's not, to me, that's not really Maeve, but it is Mary of Bethany. So I have both, I have them as Mary of Magdalene, Mary of Bethany, as two people who have a wonderful, complex, prickly, passionately loyal relationship with each other. But that's what I love about writing novels. I can put in all of it.
Yeah. And so by the time you got around to writing The Passion of Mary Magdalene, or Magdalene Rising even before that, had you already come around to your relationship with the goddess? You must have already been deeply...
Yes, I think that really predated it. I think, I wrote Return of the Goddess, and the goddess was a revelation to me. And people, I mean, it happened when I was a Quaker. And Quakers who really are with the light, I mean, the real deep birthright Quakers, they'd say, well, what? God doesn't have a gender? Why do you need God to have a gender? They didn't get it. And I can understand that, but they did not grow up saying every week, I believe in God the Father and his only begotten Son. So it's like, yeah, I did need the goddess. I really, really needed her. And I still, who doesn't? We all need the goddess. But Maeve came because I wanted a goddess that was not just mythic. I wanted that really feisty human goddess, like Jesus. I said, wait, Christians can't be the only ones with an incarnation. I want an incarnation.
Right.
Yeah.
And so the interesting thing is that you got a love affair going on between the goddess loving Maeve and between the Jew Jesus, which is in some ways made the book kind of hard to promote because because so I remember we wanted to sell it to the pagan market at one point, right? And we sent it to a couple of magazines, and they said, we can't publish anything that has anything positive to say about Christianity. That was kind of the attitude back then.
But it changed for a lot of people. They said, oh, now I have a way back. I mean, because there are a lot of people who are pagans. They're wounded people who grew up in traditional faiths. And it helped them to have that outsider stance that was still loving and critical. Maeve would scream at him, throw figs at him. So I think the pagans came around. The Catholics, who should not have embraced it, really did, because they got it. They got everything. I mean, the Catholics that I knew, maybe not all Catholics, but the Catholics that wrote to me, they were like, they got it. Yeah. And I wanted Jesus to be very, very specifically Jewish. I think you may remember that, because of all the anti-Semitism that started almost from the word go. I don't think the gospel writers necessarily knew, but people don't look at it in historical context, which was, there was terrible things happening in Jerusalem, and people were distancing themselves from Jews, and some of it comes across pretty badly. And, the Gospel of John, which is a beautiful gospel, has been misused that way. Yeah.
I mean, that your portrayal of Jesus really made a deep impression on me as well, because you were obviously undoing, some seeds of anti-Semitism. You were rooting them out through this character of Jesus.
Doing my best.
Yeah, how did that even come up for you? Why were you even sensitive to that issue?
I think that I did in a huge amount. I don't know exactly what the origins of that concern were, but certainly if anyone who's doing a lot of historical research understands that it was starts to understand the first century. And also certainly you've seen anyone who's witnessed or looks back at the history of the last 2,000 years, it's a concern, all right.
Right.
Yeah, and well, I'm not going to say anything about various Christian approaches, but I wanted to have my own approach that was very respectful of what his origin was, and the fact that from what I could tell about him, he was concerned about people's relationship with God, their relationship with each other, their relationship with the temple. I don't think he was like, let's start Christianity. Come on, everybody. I think that was your namesake.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, let me see what I got from you. So I want to talk a little bit about the role of humor in your work, because all of your work has this thread through it. So, I mean, I read the Gospels when I was young. I was very moved by the portrait of Jesus. I didn't get any jokes reading it.
You did.
And I remember there's a story that you told at one point when you were a child. You had this fantasy of killing God, but the fantasy was in the I think you must have been inspired by the Road Runner and
yes,
Wiley.
I took the material at hand that I had as a 3-year-old. I didn't think it was funny then. It was really, really serious. I really, really, really wanted to kill God. And people say, why? And it's hard to say, well, why would a 3-year-old want to do that? I mean, it's basically speculation as to why. I just knew that I wanted to get him. Probably because he had, it was probably all to do with my father. And anybody who reads this book or any of my novels knows, she's got some father issues. Yeah, she does. And But I thought I was very serious about this murder that I plotted. And I was very scared for years to come about, if God was going to get me for that. And I think it was really, I write about that. Now we've written in my life as a prayer. I write about how what my rapprochement with Jesus was and how I came to connect with him. Because at first, when I was a 3-year-old, I was like, well, God looks like a big old thundercloud and Jesus looks like Jesus in the books that you see. And I was going to kill both of them because I didn't know what to do with Casper the Friendly Ghost, but I was going to kill them. And I don't know that I ever reconciled with God the Father, to be honest, but I did reconcile with Jesus. I did a good cop, bad cop thing, I guess. Although, as you will see in chapter 3, I really love the whirlwind. I love the answer from the whirlwind in the book of Job.
Mm.
Yeah. And I still think about it a lot. In fact, I included it in a poem this morning.
Can you remind us a bit about that?
Well, yeah, the book of Job, there's a whole section about the book of Job in my formative years when I had a teacher who kind of took on my theological education. And I still talk about the book of Job a lot because Job is Job loses everything. And because God's made a wager with the devil that Job will curse him. But Job doesn't curse. He just sits there and he makes a mighty complaint. And he basically calls God to account. Says, the wicked prosper and the innocent suffer. And God knows that's true. And that's still true. And he goes on quite a bit. And he upsets his friends because they want the universe to make moral sense. If you're good, you're rewarded. If you're bad, you're punished. Ergo, Job, you must have done something. Or ergo, Job, this is for your own good. God's trying to teach you something. They want God. They want God to be tame. They want God to make sense. And Job says, nope, I'm sticking to my story. And he sticks to his story. And then finally, God speaks from the whirlwind. And he basically says, that these other guys have said the things that are not right about me. But he does address Job and he says, hey, where were you when I laid the foundations of the universe? And then he goes on with this incredible creation poem that explodes everything. It explodes the little human point of view. It doesn't say that God was right. It doesn't say that injustice doesn't exist, but it just opens everything up. And the poetry is gorgeous.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So did you reconcile with Jesus before you began to write the Maeve Chronicles? Had that already happened?
Yes, I did. And I actually, yes, I reconciled with him. And I was in Quaker meeting when I had really made up my mind that I was going to do it, that I was going to write this book. And in Quaker meeting, you get to talk to God. Sometimes you get messages. So I said, Jesus, I'm really going to do it. I'm going to write this book. It's about this wild Celtic witch called Maeve. I don't know exactly how, and I didn't know exactly how, but she's going to end up to be Mary Magdalene, and you're going to be in the book. So is there something that you want to tell me? And there was. And he said, and I quote, please don't make me a prig.
Prig.
Yeah. Well, he was a little bit British in his speaking to me because I'm an Anglican. So he used that kind of British word. Yeah.
Well, he wasn't a prig.
No, he wasn't. Yeah.
No.
It's great. He is great.
Yeah.
Maeve loves him, but that doesn't mean she doesn't scream at him.
So I gotta believe there's some writers here in the crowd here. And maybe some people just wanting to write. Do you have anything you'd like to tell people who would like to be a writer?
I think that what I've found, I'm a plotter. I show up every day and I try to, if I only get 3 or 4 words down a day or 3 or 4 sentences, it counts. So the way I feel about the Muse is if you show up for the Muse will show up for you. Doesn't mean it's going to be smooth sailing, but yeah, develop a relationship with whoever and whatever your Muse is, and that could change form over time. But I think just keep faith with the process. I had a dream once that I was on stage, and this is when I wrote a notebook. So I was on the stage and I wrote a few sentences in a spiral notebook, and I ripped it out and I threw it on the floor, and I went up and went to the bathroom, and I came back, and then I did it again. And it was a very laborious process I was doing on stage. And then at the end I said, "Ladies and gentlemen, believe it or not, this is how books get written."
Interesting. And so will you typically go through a lot of drafts?
Yeah. Yeah, and it's changed over time because I now compose on the computer, but I still go through several drafts. But I did used to go through 2 spiral notebook drafts, and then I typed.
Wow.
It was terrible with carbon paper. So,
Wow.
but yeah. And now but one thing that I do that's still the same is if I'm stuck, I'll start another file. And when I used to be stuck with a notebook, I'd get out another notebook, so it would feel like I wasn't really writing on the official manuscript, and that was helpful. And still,
Interesting.
yeah.
Looks
like we're getting time for question Q&A.
Yeah, I think so.
Should I jump in with some questions from people who are watching?
I
Yes.
think that's great.
Actually, the first one I'm going to give you is a comment because we have a comment, the conversation you had about paganism and the writings. Susan says, "I'm a pagan and loved the Maeve Chronicles. It felt like a true possible feminist perspective to the story, which I was raised with but never ever felt Christian. My born-again Christian father would have fainted at every line of it, but it felt like a way for me to reconcile some of my anger and disdain for Christian history as it's been told. My moon circle all borrowed the books from me or went on to buy them after reading the first one." So I thought you'd like that.
I do.
Now I have a couple questions for you. One is from Janice, and Janice writes, "I haven't read My Life as a Prayer." I'm sure Janice means yet.
Yeah.
But would you say you become a character in it that lives another life off the page, as does Maeve?
No, I wouldn't, because it is me. So although there's a lot of storytelling in it, so it's like the young me, the child me, the adolescent me, so yes, in that sense, yes. In the second part of it, there's a lot of pondering, and I mean, I asked a lot of questions about rage, despair, grief, beauty, what is will. There's a lot of funny parts in that too. I'm pondering prayer, and I'm asking questions, and I'm inviting other people to ask questions, and I'm telling stories there too. But it's not quite the same as when I'm writing a novel and I'm living another life. And I am writing a novel now, and I'm going to be very happy to go back to it because I really need that other life. I think something different happens with your brain chemistry. Not that you shouldn't read My Life as a Prayer, because it tells you the backstory of a lot of stories, and it's fun. It can be fun and it can be thought-provoking, but it's not the same as reading or writing a novel.
That's actually a question I had for you, Elizabeth. My question really is, how did you avoid nonfiction for so long? Because, I mean, you're an educator, you're a minister, you're a counselor, and those kinds of occupations usually would lead someone to want to, teach and educate and preach, and that all lends itself to nonfiction. How'd you avoid it?
Well, I didn't want to do it. I mean, I didn't want to be a preacher. I've never really identified as a teacher, although I think that there's a lot of ways in which we all teach each other. But I think that particularly in terms of being a counselor, I think that I was trained, I went to the new seminary, I was trained as a pastoral counselor. I would say that reading and writing novels is the best preparation for being a counselor. Because, I mean, people like to talk about, oh, you're stuck in your story. Well, of course you're in a story. So then in counseling, part of what you can have respect for that story, and you can also start telling it in different ways. So I think actually storytelling is a wonderful training for me as a counselor. I don't really want to teach anyone anything, but I might do it by accident sometimes. And when I hear myself giving sermons, I also kind of want to tell myself to stop already,
There's been a lot of conversation on the chat about what prayer is. You stimulated some conversation. And David asked the simple question, so is praying basically expressing a desire?
I think oh boy, I wish I had my journal here. I think that sometimes it is, and I think unavoidably that we do that, and there's nothing wrong with that. I used to get very mad at what I thought Buddhism was, because I thought, oh, well, you're too attached, and it's like, well, but this morning I was thinking, I started writing this morning. I started writing a poem about prayer, and it's like, wait. We've been praying for peace. We've all been praying for peace for how long? And I've had people say to me recently, well, I'm not, prayer doesn't work. And like, what do you mean by prayer? How can you say that prayer works? Because like, look what's happening. And that's a really good question. And that is one of the questions that I do ponder in the book, because we might have a desired outcome, and I don't think we should shame ourselves for that. But I don't think that that's all of what prayer is, or all of how prayer works. I don't really know how it works, but I keep doing it. And I have seen some of the ways that it works sort of up close and personal. But what I was told the other day when I was talking to my friend Jesus, like, I was basically saying, WTF, the world today. And it was like, well, and the answer that I got was, what do you do when you see a huge mountain or when you see a vast sea? And I said, well, I gaze at it. I get very still, or I might figure out how to explore it, but I don't necessarily know it. And I think that was what I was kind of being told about what's happening now and who I am in relation to it. Very small, very unknowing. So I don't think there's anything wrong with praying for what you want, but I think prayer, again, I think is about, for me, this goes back to what is writing too, it's about relationship, and relationships are not static. And maybe it's a relationship to something beyond, maybe it's a relationship to something within or around. I think unknowing is a good place to be, to know that we don't know, and to do what we need to do to get through.
I want to read you a long comment from Jinbug.
Oh,
do you know Jinbug?
I know, we're friends. She and Maeve and Ron and Jen, we're all friends on Facebook. And okay. I love her work.
Well, I want to read this long comment because it relates, because I've read My Life as a Prayer, and this relates to a lot of stuff you talk about in the memoir. Elizabeth, not a question, but a few comments for you. I like your use of the word communion when speaking about prayer, and am delighted that you include praying for the spirit or deity as well as part of your daily practice. For many years, I've been intrigued by the quantum theory of non-locality, which opens the door that particles have impact on each other across time and space, and the idea that we actually do influence each other and the world and the universe in ways we do not understand. As a birthright Quaker who's evolved into a non-theist friend, when I pray, I feel as if I'm stroking those quantum strings in a meaningful way. My copy of your book only just arrived. Cannot wait to read it as Lectio Divina in the coming weeks. P.S. Heretic is such a lovely word to claim. And then Jin writes it in Greek. To choose, heretic, to choose, one who chooses.
Thank you, Jin. That's beautiful.
Janice wants to know if there's a new Maeve Chronicles novel coming.
Well, not that I know of, but you never know. See, if you read Red Road Priestess, I don't know if everybody knows about that. That's the 4th book that I never expected to write. I thought it was going to be 3 books. That's a nice Celtic number. I think Red Road Priestess, I'd just like to put in a plug for that because I think it really does speak to our times. So you'll see what happens at the end. So I don't know of another Maeve story right now, but I am really open to Maeve has some amazing granddaughters that we meet in Red Robe Priestess. And I have sort of said, hey, I'm here. So I'm kind of open to what comes. But of course, see, Maeve had a life, a very specific, she has a life beyond the page, but that story was the story that I had to wrestle with. So if another one comes and says, hey, I'm your story, wrestle with me or dance with me, I will. But I don't have any plans for it. I am writing a fairy tale novel right now called Over the Edge of This World.
Pooja asks, do you see my life as a prayer as a follow-up in some way to your book, Small Bird? The poem Heart Prayer speaks to our times.
Yeah, I think that the poems that are in my life as a prayer do come from places. That one comes from Small Bird. And yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. That it's maybe a prose pondering of prayer, and Small Bird was a poem pondering of prayer, and they meet somewhere. Somebody just asked about Ma. I saw that flash by.
Yeah, tell us about Ma.
Okay, well, Ma is the blessed. Who that was Catherine La Forza. Yeah, well, Ma. I thought of her, she was she gave birth to Jesus. She did everything she had to do. But when Ma came barreling in, she was like this person that was always listening to both worlds at the same time. And they would say she kibitzed with the angels. She could be very eccentric, very powerful, very wise, very maddening. Anything but meek and mild. So one of the fun things was to explore Maeve's relationship with her and her relationship with Jesus. And that was a lot of fun. Ma is worth the price of admission as far as I'm concerned. She's a scene stealer. She upstages Maeve on a regular basis. And she's in Bright Dark Madonna also. And I just love her.
So do you recommend prayer? You have friends, I'm sure, who you tell them the name of the title of your new book, and they wrinkle their noses and say, oh, that sounds so old-fashioned.
I haven't had those friends yet. My friends are pretty tolerant of me, and they know that I've worked very hard, and they probably read it even if they weren't interested in the subject because they're my friends. I would recommend it for anyone who has their own questions.
Well, actually, I didn't mean, do you recommend your book? I meant, do you
yes, I do recommend it.
I meant recommend the practice of prayer.
Oh, yeah. I don't think I do that in that sense, because I want to respect what people's practices are. If anybody asks me, I have clients of all kinds of clients, counseling clients who have all kinds of backgrounds and all kinds of relationship with spirit, or not with, or don't want to have a relationship. So I follow their lead, basically, because I don't think it matters whether somebody prays in some sense that they think of praying or not. There's a whole way of praying that I left out of the book, which I hadn't. I know people who pray with their hands. They pray by making things. They pray. Some people make, when they pray for someone, they make a little altar for them. Some people make, prayer ties. Some people knit. I'm not very handy, but I think anything we do can be prayer, because that's really about an intention to have a relationship, whether it's out there or within or around. If you pray, if you got to pray, and you can and WTF can be a prayer. We just decided that, somebody I was talking to on last Tuesday. That's the prayer after help.
Mimi is with us from the UK, and Mimi asks, where do you think your most interesting research came while writing the Maeve Chronicles books?
Oh, I also read a lot of books about the Roman Empire and prostitution and the worship of Isis. But my favorite book, this is going to be like a true confession. My very favorite book was Daily Life in the Time of Jesus. It was written by, I think, a Catholic, a Roman Catholic religious. I found it in the library at Bull's Head meeting, and I loved it so much, I didn't give it back. That's my only theft. I could still give it back, but I don't want to. But maybe I will someday now that I've confessed publicly. I still have it. But I loved that because it was like, what did they eat? What were the idioms? Another book that was really interesting was basically about modern Palestinian life, which was very, very like the life. A lot of the customs were very similar to the customs of the Jewish people of Jesus's time. So I love things that steeped me in the sensuality of that life. Yes, that's right, Jen.
Yeah, that's
But
the
you're
book.
not, I didn't steal it from your Quaker meeting.
Because someone was asking for the title again, and so Jen
Yeah,
put it.
that's it. Yep.
The book
That's
that
the one.
everyone knows that Elizabeth stole.
Yeah. I hope that nobody, well, if I'll go visit Bull's Head and bring the book back someday. Yeah.
Well, we might have time for just one more question. Paul, do you need to jump in, or should I keep asking things from the chat here?
Go ahead, keep asking.
All right. Well, Carrie says, can't wait to read My Life as a Prayer. I'm not traditionally a person who prays as my grandmother did with her rosary. The woods whisper prayers to me. That's as close as I get.
Close enough, Carrie.
That sounds like you, Elizabeth, a little bit.
Yep.
Someone wants to know, someone was very interested in that writing process conversation that the two of you had. And it was Rose, and Rose asked, does the thought for your writing come into your head and not leave you alone until you write it down?
I don't always write it down, but the thoughts come in and don't leave me alone. Yeah. And they sort of come, like, especially for the novel, they come in and there's kind of like almost like a shiver of recognition. And it's very mysterious. So I often don't write things that come. One of the things I love best about writing is all the time that I spend daydreaming about it when I'm in the shower or whatever, or going for a walk. But I don't always write it down. I figure if it's meant to stay, it will.
Susan wants to know, what do you like to read yourself? Like, who inspires you?
I like to read novels. And I never remember what I've been reading. I'm reading, I just read I only know what I'm reading now. I just read The Berry Pickers, and I'm reading Let Us Descend. I like novels and I love mysteries. I like novels that take me somewhere that I don't know. Or maybe somewhere that I do know, but they show me something new about it. I like historical novels. I like novels that give me other worlds and other perspectives.
So you like historical fiction and fantasy fiction?
I do. And so every now and then I've read science fiction because my daughter gave me the Broken Earth trilogy by N.K. Jemisin, amazing writer. So yeah, but I don't read nonfiction too often, although I will sometimes. Actually, for my Lectio Divina, I often read nonfiction. That's when I read nonfiction. Sometimes I read poetry then too. But it's my time in the morning when I read a few pages of something, and that's usually nonfiction.
When's the last time you read or listened to a sermon?
I think I blocked it out. I really have avoided sermons. My father, I remember some of my father's opening lines, though, from when I was a kid, because he liked to shock people. So I can remember two opening lines. He said, Jesus Christ had diaper rash.
Oh, my. That
was his Christmas sermon once. And I remember an Easter sermon, Christ is risen, so what? Like, I even look like him when I say that. Yeah, he loved to shock people, but I don't think I listened much past the shock lines. One thing that I do when I had to listen to sermons, especially bishops, I would start counting how many times they could have brought it to a rousing close. And I'd usually get up to about 7. So I'm not very tolerant.
You were an editor as a child.
I was, of sermons. Yes, I thought, no, stop now. Yeah. I mean, I'm sure a good sermon is a good thing, but I was very happy to leave sermons behind when I became a Quaker. I much preferred messages, even if I didn't get them or they didn't speak directly to me. I really, really, really respected that anybody who was moved could speak. I loved that. So that was very different than hearing sermons.
Yes. Well, we have lots of lovely comments. I know you've seen some of them there, Elizabeth and Paul. I did not read everyone. I did not read everyone's conversations back and forth about various things, but you've definitely gotten people talking and thinking about all of the issues and topics that are a part of your memoir, My Life as a Prayer. So are you done with nonfiction now? Is this it for you?
For now. I mean, I don't want to predict anything, but I'm going back to my novel as soon as possible, as soon as the sort of chores of, well, I mean, yeah, I'm going back as soon as I can.
Okay.
And if something else wants to be written that isn't fiction, someone or something will let me know.
Well, it sounds like we should bring this to a close. We're right at the end of the hour. Thank you very much to Paul Cohen and to Elizabeth Cunningham. Everyone, I hope you will find a copy of My Life as a Prayer, a multi-faith memoir, which is Elizabeth's.
And this is the final copy that doesn't have "not for sale" on it.
Oh, well, see, nobody could see that. See, I could finger. No one could see that. All right. Well, everyone loves you and is sending you wishes here through the.
I love
space.
all of you for being here. Readers are the best. I mean, that's how a book is finished when it's read. That's the Holy Spirit.
Amen.
Amen.
All right. So thank you all on behalf of Monkfish Book Publishing. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you. Thank you, Jon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you, Paul, and thank you, Jon, and thank you, Colin.